Hello and welcome to the Motion Racing Podcast. I'm Sascha, this is Georgie Mackay, and we're recording this on a Tuesday, and it turns out that it is No Makeup Tuesday. No motorsport podcaster has ever tried this in the history of motorsport. Marshall Pruitt, he's never appeared on a single podcast without makeup. I guarantee you neither has Gary Anderson. So we're wading into new territory here, or at least I am anyway. I'd love to come up with a story behind it, but, you know, mental health is a weird thing. Look after yourselves, folks, and I just couldn't be bothered. I'm here for you, and I thought I'd rather prepare for the podcast than, frankly, get myself done up. So, Georgie, you've had your day off today as well as me, so how did it go for you?
You know, I had my hair cut and then I did nothing else, so it's been a lovely day, as you might still be able to tell from the natural light that is coming into my room here. But, you know, you say about No Makeup Tuesday, but that's with the coverage that we're going to give Elf later. Maybe that's all the more reason that they should sponsor the podcast. Elf, if you're listening.
Absolutely, yeah. I certainly think we are the motorsport podcast most likely to be sponsored by a cosmetics company.
I think we're up there with the gay racing pod, I would say.
And maybe also the races and colossally that's history in third place. I'm not sure.
No comment, chef.
Shout out to Richard Williams and Matt Bishop. Love that podcast. I mean the joke affectionately. Anyway, Formula E. So the last race we saw was Monaco. Decent enough. I think 1 point made by Jonathan Gitlin on our Discord server, which you can join using the link in the description, was we haven't had a truly great race at Monaco since Gen 2. I think we talked about this in the last podcast, but this really bore out, didn't it, over the two races of the weekend. Good to have a double header at Monaco. Incident-filled races are, I think, fun for people, but they feel a bit like old Formula E. It feels like something that generally the series has grown out of. And I felt that in many ways the crashes were the best action this weekend, unfortunately.
I think definitely looking at the likes of Cassidy and Dennis's early crash in race 1, that probably did cause a few championship permutations for both of those drivers. I don't think realistically either of them have a shot at it now, which as a Cassidy fan, it's sad for me to keep saying this race after such a electric start to the season. It's just race after race, poor result. But I think there's a lot of drivers now that you can probably count them out as a result of the two races in Monaco.
Yeah, one of them who might have thought he was in contention or in mathematical contention going into the weekend was Antonio Felix da Costa. Now, my view on his, as Charles Leclerc, Monaco resident would call it, incident, was that it wasn't necessarily Dan Ticktum's fault. So, for those of you who don't remember, da Costa was on the left coming out of the tunnel, Ticktum was on the right, and Ticktum kind of took his usual line into the chicane, which meant going over towards the left on da Costa, and da Costa just got squeezed. My own view is da Costa can't have been trying an overtaking manoeuvre there because he was too far behind, and the only way that you can get an overtake done into the, well, they call it the new Nouvelle chicane, but Nouvelle already means new, so I guess it's the new chicane. But into there, you really need the consent and fealty of the other driver to make the move. And that clearly wasn't going to happen with Ticktum, so I think da Costa should have probably known to back off, and I don't think Ticktum was necessarily doing something that would have been dangerous anywhere else in the world, but I'm open to other views, certainly.
You know, the new Nouvelle chicane reminds me of a place near where I grew up, which is Trepenna, where there's a place called Trepenna Hill, which is stinky. Go away. Go and lie down. Go.
That's not Georgie's nickname for me. That is Georgie's dog, by the way.
Yeah, there's a place near where I grew up called Trepenna Hill, which if you split that up into how it's spelled, Tor, Pen, how, they all mean hill in one various dialect or not. So the place is called Hill. But there's only one hill, you know, so the new Nouvelle chicane has always sort of reminded me about that. Yeah. But, you know, it's difficult to call on the da Costa Ticktum incident because watching the race, as someone that fancies themselves a bit of a racer, you know, I haven't raced any real life cars, but as a sim racer, from da Costa's perspective, I completely agreed with him, and I actually finished his sentence for him while he was speaking when he said, that's what happens. I said, that's exactly what happens. And then he said that immediately after I said that, because what I saw was someone moving under braking. Yes,
Right.
he did come to the apex, but he seemed to come to the apex a lot earlier and cut off the line a lot earlier than he needed to, which is to say earlier than DaCosta was expecting him to. So that seems to say that, there was an element of unpredictable driving there. We don't often see people go into the back of each other when there isn't something like an unpredictable element. We saw that with Pepe Marti in the early stages of the season. The unpredictability was now you're yellow. And it's really difficult for them to game that. And they try to game it, which maybe is a safety issue in and of itself. But for me, it really looked like DaCosta had his front wing at least alongside the car, like Dan Ticktum's car, and Dan started to come across while he was braking. Which is, moving under braking, which you're not allowed to do. It's unpredictable. I would have been quite annoyed if that had been done to me as well in the same situation. It's difficult to call because the camera angles aren't great in a lot of disciplines of racing. You might say, no, he wasn't alongside there. He didn't have any right to racing room. And even in, say, GT3 racing, that would be completely true because you have to have your front wheels alongside their rear wheels at least. And that was not the case. But in, say, Formula One, you have to respect another car's front wing. And I think that's a reasonably similar assessment in Formula E. You have to respect the other car's physical space, regardless how much space it is there. Yes, you might say that that's not necessarily a particularly good opportunity for an overtake, but again, as a sim racer, I'm thinking, if I put my car alongside here, maybe he goes deep, maybe he misses the corner entirely, has to rejoin, and I just get the position. It's not necessarily about, I suppose, getting through the corner together. It's about getting into the head of the other driver. We don't necessarily know if DaCosta had Ticktum not, as I felt, moved under braking, if DaCosta would have just backed off and then gone in the corner normally. It looked like a bit of a mind game to me, as opposed to a full attempt to descend. But I think maybe it was a little bit too successful, which sometimes you do run that risk.
Yeah, I didn't think it was a full attempt to descend. I figured maybe it was an element of sizing up, an element of sort of, as they say in football, letting them know you're there. But just felt that, and, these decisions are taken in milliseconds. It's not like... we're sitting here with more than a week's hindsight, but I just feel again that any kind of move into the chicane relies on you really being alongside when you exit the tunnel, and DaCosta wasn't alongside. That doesn't mean that Ticktum's move was completely ethical if he meant it. My feeling was, as I've maybe done too much in the past, to give young Daniel the benefit of the doubt and suggest that he took his usual line. But then when I think about it, no, because the usual line into the chicane is wider than that anyway. So yes, there may have been skullduggery on both sides. I agree with you there.
I think either way, it comes back to what DaCosta said. That's exactly what happens. You went for a low percentage move or you tried to get into the other driver's head. You succeeded, and ultimately it didn't pay off particularly well for either of you. That. Yeah. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like going into the hairdressers and asking for a fringe and then not being disappointed by the results. I say this as someone who went in there today as well, and yeah, very pleased that I stuck with the usual. And by the way, Georgie, looking good yourself.
Thank you very much. Yourself as well.
So the other incident in race one, very quickly, was the Cassidy Dennis incident. I think that was just a very classic Formula E incident where no drivers want to cede any ground going into the chicane, and I think there were 4 or 5 into a very small space, and it's maybe just an example of nobody being willing to give ground or cede another position. But I didn't see anything particularly nasty or unethical about that. I just saw two drivers kind of losing their judgment for a split second. But what were your thoughts on that?
It was a bit of a classic 3-into-1 does not go situation, and it reminded me a lot of that 5-into-1 does not go situation that Dan Ticktum lost out in earlier in the situation in the season. It does make me think about how wide the Gen 4s are, and if we really can go to Monaco with these things, given how much wider they are, how much more powerful they are, how unwilling our drivers are to cede position. And I will say, when you find yourself in those positions, there's very little you can do. As the outside car, you can track out as far as you can go, but if there's a wall there, you can't go any further. As the car in the middle, you can track out as far as the other car, but if there's a car there or a wall there, you can't go any further. And that's just the mathematics of it. It's 3-into-1 will not go. It's not necessarily on any one driver. I didn't see any particular maliciousness or any fault on any of them. It was just racing and the product of close racing that, as we said, we've come accustomed to in Formula E so far. It does again, as a sim racer, it comes back to the sort of situations that you put yourself in is a large part of racing as much as it is sim racing. But yeah, I don't think I would have been putting myself into a 3-wide situation. As I say, there's very little you can do when you're in that situation, but you might just choose not to be in that situation in the first place, might be a better decision. Jake didn't seem very happy with it, and he was probably the one that came off the worst after all of it, so that didn't really surprise me. But it was good that Nick managed to get himself back into the top 10. Good for him for that. Monaco isn't a particularly easy track to recover at, but yeah, I don't think it'll be helping his championship hopes, as I said earlier, particularly much.
Yeah, I think with Dennis, he's probably also frustrated at the way his title challenge is petering out. I think that in a Porsche-powered car, he would expect to be there or thereabouts every weekend. Jake will have expected to be up there in the championship alongside, I think Wehrlein going into this race or coming out of this race, and he isn't. And I think the interesting thing is that for the first time, we're seeing Drugovich performing as well or better than him in certain races. I don't think this is the Jake Dennis downfall. I think he is still undisputably their number one driver on consistency, but it's interesting because none of Dennis's teammates prior to this, and I'm thinking back to David Beckman, for example, got anything like a handle on that car. And it feels like Drugovich is kind of being given the time and is finally sort of showing through, at least at certain races where he feels comfortable.
Drugovich has been around in quote-unquote junior Formula for quite a while, and he did pretty well in Formula 2 and Formula 3. I think he's one of, if you want to say the lesser experienced drivers. I'm sort of looking at you, Joel Eriksson. Sorry about that. I've got a lot of faith in Drugovich to be able to have the skills to wheel the deals that he needs to wheel, as it were. That's not necessarily to say that I don't think Joel Eriksson does, but I think Drugovich has got a little bit of pedigree behind him when it comes to single-seater racing, and if any young upstart is going to come and hold a candle to one of our previous season champions, I think he's got as good a shot as anyone, I would say, especially against someone like Jake Dennis. The team overall seems to be struggling a little bit at the moment. So if those are the moments you need to shine as a quote-unquote second driver, really, isn't it? You want to take advantage of any lull in form that you can to make yourself seem the rightful number one that you believe you are. And as you say, I don't necessarily think Drugovich is putting any fights up for that title quite yet in the team between him and Jake, but it's nice to see him not being outperformed. It's nice to see him putting up a fight. And as I say, I've been watching him for a long time. It's just nice to see him succeed after a long time of seeing him in junior formulas. I sort of expected to see him in Formula One one day, but that never really materialized. So it's nice to see him in the pinnacle of at least electric motorsport,
Yeah, he very nearly on 2 occasions had an opportunity with Aston Martin in F1. I personally think if you are an F1 reserve driver, you're quite poorly served. I think that it's very difficult for me to say because obviously the pay is much lower in Formula E, and the races are fewer and further between. You're talking about a 16 race calendar versus 24. But on the other hand, I think that someone like Drugovich probably appreciates the regular action and probably appreciates as well being part of a team that seem to want to develop him.
Definitely. I think that's one of the most important things in motorsport from a jobber's perspective, as it were, someone that's trying to make their career out of motorsport. It's less now about when you're someone like Drugovich, who arguably has sort of proved himself throughout all of those junior formulas and the racing that he's done. Now it's probably about finding a stable gig, really, and I can see that with where he's at the moment.
Yeah. Good driver anyway, Drugovich, and I'm sure Jake Dennis will fight back. But after the 2 races, and we will talk about race 2 in a moment, Mitch Evans in the lead of the title on the way out. And I think as far as you can feel comfortable in Formula E, he will feel very comfortable with the performance he put in this weekend. He stayed out of trouble. He avoided any of the obstacles that might have come up. Incredible pass for the lead, although didn't manage to keep it. So Evans continues to be bang on form. And this is, I don't want to tempt fate. Saskia, you might be listening, but yeah, this is looking more and more like it might be, isn't it?
That, I will say, that pass around the outside of two cars effectively for the lead, and then to immediately be like, no, I need to be back in third. No, this is too much energy to use, was so funny. It was such a Formula E coded moment. You're like, yeah, let's get the lead. Now let's get out of here. I can do it. I'm here. I'm on pace. You can all see it. Now I'm going to go and save some energy. Now, if somebody else wants to take the win, that would be really nice. Thank you. Sort of reminds me of when to go back to more cycling terminology, this isn't the peloton this time, though. This is when you get the breakaway group and you get the peloton trying to catch them up towards the end of the stage. But it didn't really pan out that way either, did it? And because he just sort of was subsumed back into the peloton immediately. But he had his moment, and that's what we like to see. Completely antithetical to what we said about Lola MasterCard, the previous race, where they got themselves to the front and then immediately fell back. But which is to say, when it's a team that's regularly running at the front, you value that. It's good to see. But when it's a team that's just really, as I said back in the previous podcast, a bit of a flash in the pan, they were there, and I guess I'm talking about them even now. So that's a success in itself. But ultimately, I'm talking about Mitch Evans, who is, in control of the title as of at least the first race. And to be honest, I think it's a really good swan song of a season for him already. I'm going to stick with my analogy of eggs in baskets. If I've got 12 eggs, I think I'm probably going to put about 8, 9 in his basket at the moment, and the rest are going in Pascal's. But the majority of the eggs are definitely in Evan's basket now.
Someone who will be making a massive omelette to celebrate race 2, though, is Ollie Rowland. Back in second in the championship, which may not last. Obviously, Wehrlein is probably due another good race or 2 after the time he's had in Berlin and Monaco. But yeah, what a win for Rowland in the second race. His first win back, as you correctly say in the notes, and after winning the title. And he continues to be one of the most consistently brilliant drivers in Formula E. And I think it's worth paying tribute to the fact that he's been there so long, and he seems to have got better and better season on season. He knew exactly where to make the move on Mortara in that second race. Obviously, Mortara got the penalty later anyway, but I just think he looked thoroughly in control. And given how the Nissan powertrain, the Nissan chassis has looked like a handful in some races, we know from previous years that Rowland is a good race for Monaco. sorry, Monaco is a good race for Roland, but I think that he looked thoroughly in control. And if that means that they've ironed out whatever gremlins were there before, I think he might be a challenger as well.
That's completely fair. He's second in the championship now, coming out of race 2, and it's interesting to see the swing in the championship as a result of that win, because someone who we of course didn't see the same swing with was De Vries, who won the first race, but he's pretty far down there, and I don't really see him coming into it in any way, shape, or form. It does say something about Monaco. Maybe it's one of those tracks that in order to win, you have to have already won it. Which, it's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies in a way that doesn't really make any sense. But I'm a big fan of that when it comes to racing. There's this whole, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, there's this whole superstition that you're not a race winner until you're a race winner. You can't win a race until you've won a race, and it's impossible. It's block universe. There are only set events. There's no way to move forward. I love it. It doesn't make any sense, but not moving forward is probably an accurate characterization of De Vries's championship. Despite this win, it's nice for Mahindra, I will say. Very, very nice for Mahindra. I really thought Edo would have gotten the win for them, the first one of the season at least. I think I put an egg in Edo's basket last podcast, but it's interesting to see De Vries getting it, and probably another driver that we don't necessarily give enough credit for how good he actually is in the machinery. He makes a lot of silly decisions and doesn't often show it, but it takes real talent to win a race at Monaco, which is what you can say of both Ollie Rowland and De Vries after both of their wins.
Yeah,
really, really solid drives from both of them.
absolutely. I was listening to De Vries's post-race interview again, and he said, it was especially sweet as he'd been going through it this season. It must be exhausting always being the anti-hero. That's all I can say. Like, he's been going through it, but it's almost been entirely his fault. So I'm glad that he's got over those humps from earlier in the season. And he does seem like the definition of a confidence driver in the sense that when he's in a flow state, he's able to iron out all the errors and just be one of the fastest people on the track, but he needs a bit of warming up to get there. I think we saw that in his title year at Mercedes, to be honest, didn't we? To an extent. Sure, he took advantage of group qualifying, but also I think he took advantage of just the fact that he felt like he was in a stable situation that he could build from as well.
You have to race the championship that you're given, and I'm never the kind of person that's going to say someone can win a championship by accident or anything like that over the course of a season. There are no accidents. He's a good driver. He just sometimes doesn't really remember it. That's probably the best I can put it.
And great to see him back on top of the podium anyway. Couple of stories about Citroën. One nice, one maybe a little bit more in the weeds. Let's start with the in the weeds story, the business story. So the Citroën Formula E franchise was previously owned by MSG Monaco Sports Group. That sort of went into the hands of Formula E. And anyway, so Formula E Operations is currently looking for investment for that franchise while Citroën runs the cars. And so we've got a situation essentially where Formula E Operations is running the business side of the team in the background. Some teams have, quietly and less quietly complained about the excellent recruitment they seem to be doing in spite of that, but you can't really hold a team back, can you? You need to make sure that the grid is entirely competitive, and I would rank this maybe alongside, in a way, when Bernie Ecclestone put some money into Minardi to make sure that he had enough teams on the F1 grid for the time before they were bought out by Red Bull. I don't see a big problem with it. I think it might be a sign of good governance, but I wonder how you feel about the sports promoters taking over a team or being in charge in the background of a team. It's obviously not a good long-term solution, but if it gives us a larger grid, would you say it's something that needs to be done?
I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword for sure. For a long time, Formula One had been lambasted for not doing anything to save its struggling teams. You only have to go back sort of 16 years for 3 whole teams to come and go, Marussia, Caterham and Hispania. They went through their entire life cycle in that small period, and Formula One did ostensibly nothing to save them. Formula E, I think, is doing its best to try and save a team and keep the grid at the size it is, whether they have commercial licenses in place that say that they need X cars in the grid or not, which is something that Formula One has, for example. A lot of racing series have that. I'm not sure. There probably are things like that in place. I doubt that losing one team will bring them within those parameters anyway, but it might bring them closer than is comfortable, especially when we look at uncertainty around the Penske powertrain. Like, what if they just don't figure that out? It's for Formula E as a company itself, as its own governance, to worry about things like that and plan for the worst case scenario. So I can understand why that they would want to do it. Again, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Something we will get onto later is I would love to see BYD buy this team out in some sort of revamp of Maserati. Actually, they even bring back Maserati as BYD buys out Stellantis legacy brand to bring back the Formula E team. But they seem more interested in Formula One anyway, so that's maybe a bit of a pipe dream on my side. But it would be nice to see. Yeah, ultimately a bit of a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation, I think, for Formula E on saving this team. There would be critics either side. The team's not doing that well either.
Mm.
It's not they're not blowing the other teams out of the competition. One of the cars is struggling to score at all. The other car, granted, was an early season title competitor, but as we've discussed, not particularly anymore. They're a mid-table team at best at the moment, and I don't think you can really read too much into that. They're clearly not pumping so much money into it to turn it into a flagship team for the sport. That's not what's happening. And anybody that thinks that's what's happening may need to look at the results and have a little bit of a reality check. Citroen are not going to, shatter the earth anytime soon, I don't think.
I honestly thought that was what Maserati were going to try and do. I thought, well, even if it's just the name, covering the old Venturi team, I thought there's no way Maserati are not in Formula E and are in Formula E to mess about. I thought we're going to see a regular front runner here because Maserati would want to be the Ferrari of Formula E. That turned out to not be the case, obviously, and Monaco Sports Group were left in huge debts. So, Formula E, as you say, are doing the right thing for them and ultimately the right thing for the continuation of the series. But you mentioned manufacturers, BYD looking at Formula One. I've never understood really why companies like Kia don't look at Formula E. They kind of exist as a sort of second tier automaker in terms of they produce very nice, attractive cars these days, many of them EVs, most of them, in fact, and yet they don't seem to get the same level of credit that even a Hyundai does. And I would have thought with Hyundai and Genesis in motorsport, actually Kia might have followed, but they've always seemed to follow their own strategy, and maybe a little bit like Volkswagen never wanted to get involved in Formula One while Bernie Ecclestone was in charge. Maybe they've just made a governance decision that they don't need motorsport right now.
I know what you mean about that sort of mid-range manufacturer, because I would have loved to have seen a Skoda Formula E team, and they make some good electric cars. I don't see why there's certainly there's a market for it. I don't see why these manufacturers aren't getting involved. Obviously, maybe it's sort of as an Aston Villa fan, perhaps, whoa, Europa League. Maybe I can analogize it to the amount of money that goes into and coming out of those sports. It's a lot similar. Formula One is kind of like the Champions League, right? Whereas Formula E is, relatively speaking, more like the Europa League in terms of the money and the spectacle that it generates around your brand. So I can understand why companies would gravitate towards Formula One more. Especially, a lot of people have said, "Oh well, BYD, they make electric cars. Why don't they go to Formula E? They make hybrids as well. That's a large part of their business is hybrids as well, range extended EVs and things like that. So the current Formula One formula makes perfect sense for them to get involved in.
Yeah,
Formula
yeah.
E just probably doesn't get enough eyes on them for what they want to achieve. And that's one of the things I hope the Gen 4s going to change. I hope that the cars are going to attract more eyes, but I think ultimately that's one of the challenges that's facing Formula E at the moment, is it's getting those eyes onto it, you know.
Yeah. One of the things that, but by the way, you brought back some nostalgia from 2010, Hispania Racing Team. Far be it from me to criticise any driver for doing a deal with HRT, but still. But the thing about BYD is they do seem to have unlimited money from somewhere somehow, and they do seem to now be the world's third largest automaker, which is crazy progress from the fact that they essentially started 5 years ago, I think, producing cars for the international market, maybe less than that. So it's extraordinary, the take up, and everything I've heard suggests that the actual products they're producing are, that they're in that sector where something like Renault used to be. They're maybe not the best made, but they're the best for the price. So I think people are justifiably going for them. And I think an F1 presence would suit BYD because they probably would like the prestige. I think F1 in turn would love a Chinese team. I think Formula E would as well. That's probably why they're going there twice, for Shanghai and Sanya this year. By the way, lovely to see Sanya back on the calendar. Really enjoy that race, or at least that track. But as far as talking about BYD, something else that came up is that people seem to believe Christian Horner might be in charge of it if it does go into Formula One. I love the discourse around Christian Horner, because we don't need to go over the WhatsApp text messages, but they are still very much there if you want to look at them and Google them. And what's interesting is I don't think he'll be doing anything like that again. I think he's very much learned his lesson. But he did leave a trail of destruction there, and he did leave an employee essentially, being wrongly doxxed on the internet for a whistleblowing complaint. According to the BBC, the unnamed employee is now working elsewhere in F1 and doing fine. So I guess the story has a reasonable ending. But Horner, for me, is another example of a powerful man who escapes unscathed. And the problem with him fronting a big global brand like BYD is that, to me, motorsport shouldn't just be ticking the diversity box. It should be something where women feel safe employed by any team, and or indeed working as a journalist or working wherever, Marshall. And I'm not sure it sends out the right message that motorsport journalists were so quick to brush over the allegations and move on, because it kind of suggested that they were afraid perhaps of losing their access if they went in too hard on it. Perhaps they felt it was a political issue, not a motorsport issue, etc. But Christian Horner isn't that warm a personality, actually. I think he's considered to be this bubbly, life of the party character because of how he was portrayed on Drive to Survive. But I think the only people who see him that way are motorsport journalists, and that maybe reflects a little bit of the kind of people that motorsport journalists spend most of their time around. I don't know, just thoughts.
It will be difficult for me to support a BYD team if it is led by Christian Horner. That's probably as much as I can really say. Yeah. I imagine it probably would be a difficult environment to work in light of a lot of allegations that were made. I would love to support a BYD effort as an electric car owner. It feels like it feels right. There are no real. I said before, BYD aren't specifically an EV company. They make hybrids as well, but it's probably more accurate, I think, to call BYD a battery company that also makes cars, or rather a battery company for a long period of the company's history that started to develop cars to put around their batteries, which is probably why they've been able to spring up as fast as they have, is because they've designed it that way around rather than the other way around, rather than trying to figure out how to plug electric technology into pre-existing car technology. They literally just went, we've got batteries, let's build cars around them. Fantastic little business model they've got there. I would love to support a ostensibly electrified manufacturer in the highest levels of motorsports, but it would be very, very difficult to do so with Christian Horner at the head of it. Even without the as we say, the allegations that were made against him, I just didn't particularly enjoy the cut of his jib while he was a team principal at Red Bull. I will say, I was much more of a Mattia Binotto fan, but what do I know?
Oh, the someone whose jib we like the cut of, I think we can both agree, is Doriane Pin, the Formula One Academy champion and current, I think, WEC driver. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. Yep, sure, that I'm right. Is now the development driver for Citroën as they develop their Gen 4 chassis and powertrain. I think this is great for Doriane. I think it's great for Citroën. She is one of the leading sim drivers around, as she's shown with being hired and being kept on by Mercedes. Quite often, F1 Academy comes across as a box ticking exercise in terms of the drivers are not kept on after their stint with the F1 junior team. But I think Mercedes are absolutely right to see something in her. Maybe along with Abby Pulling, she's the woman racing driver coming up who has shown the most talent and the most application. Honestly, I think when one of the current generation of women breaks through into one of the top level international series, it will probably, I mean, single-seater series, it will probably be her. I could be wrong, but I hope I'm right.
I definitely agree with that. Doriane Pin has been around for what feels like a decade already. I remember watching her in Ferrari Challenge, doing well in those races years ago. She sounds, looks, feels like an old head of motorsport already. She very much gives me a sort of nostalgic feeling towards the likes of Alice Powell. There's success coming for Doriane Pin, whether it's in World Endurance Championship, whether she finds herself in a hypercar eventually. Like that's probably where I could see her most realistically winning something. But ultimately, I very much could see Doriane Pin winning a world title in a hypercar one day. It wouldn't surprise me. Or if she ended up moving to IMSA, I could see her. She'd probably have to move to Porsche to win an IMSA, which, I wouldn't necessarily be a fan of. I'm not the hugest fan of Porsche when it comes to IMSA, Penske more broadly, really. But I think I've referred to Penske as the evil corp of motorsport before for anyone that has watched Mr. Robot. So there's that. I would hate to see her go there. I'd love to see her win there, and ultimately she would. But that's sort of my take on Doriane Pin. I think her career will go very far. I can see her winning world championships in something. I don't know if it'll be Formula E. I think she's in a development role at the moment. I don't know if it'll be Formula E, but I absolutely see her potentially winning a championship as part of an endurance team in hypercar, if not in GT3. She's already proven that she can drive GT cars, but honestly, the sky's the limit for Doriane Pin, and probably to a lesser extent the same for Abby Pulling. I don't know if Abby Pulling has quite the same ceiling as Doriane Pin, but ultimately beat her over the course of a season, So there's as much to be said for Abby Pulling's pedigree there. Like, we're going to be looking back on these two, and we might say Abby Pulling was the woman that beat Doriane Pin in the same way that I think it was Paul di Resta that beat Sebastian Vettel. We might see them around for a very, very long period of time in whatever guise they choose to be in. I think Abby's in GB3 again this season.
Yeah.
And that's really good to see because she was making some really good progress towards the end of last season. It'd be interesting to see where she goes after this. But definitely Doriane Pin one to watch as well.
Abby Pulling, I think, signed to Rodin Motorsport for F1 Academy, and they very sensibly kept her for GB3. GB3 obviously doesn't have the same global exposure that some of the other series we've just spoken about does, but I mean, can the modern day version of British Formula 3 that is GB3 still be a good springboard? I mean, obviously, we're not talking about someone who's necessarily going to be an F1 driver, realistically. She quit the Alpine Academy because I think she felt like the opportunities weren't there, and she'd rather spend her time racing week to week. And I can empathise with that, but what do you think Abby Pulling's future looks like?
Probably the same. Sports cars, I would say. I don't necessarily see her going to the likes of Formula 2. I don't especially with Alpine going the way that they're going at the moment. She was attached to their academy at one point. I don't even think that would be the case anymore. There's very few pathways in that regard for her. Not to say that I think she wouldn't deserve it. There's plenty of drivers that have deserved a seat in Formula One that it hasn't materialized for them. But that's not to say that their talents can't be used elsewhere and shouldn't be applied elsewhere. I think Abby maybe what my mind wants me to say Intercontinental GT Challenge would be a decent place for her to look to go next. That would sort of be a step up. It's an international series that get her into GT racing. She could even make the step between that and British GT. I think sports cars is probably where it's at. But I think, honestly, I've been saying this for a little while with the likes of the IMSA and World Endurance Championship hypercars and the GT3s, the way everything's going at the moment, we're in a golden age of sports car racing. Please, do not limit yourself to just Formula E or, God forbid, just Formula One. There is a golden age of sports car racing. I know we've covered BTCC, which is producing some pretty fun races every time as well, but generally all across the board, golden age of sports car racing.
And there's so many stories out there as well. I do want to finish on Doriane Pin and say one of the unfair things, if you like, about women rising on the motorsport structure is I think they are judged a lot on their marketability, and I think there were drivers who were judged to be more conventionally marketable than Doriane Pin. She's got where she is through pure speed, but also I think people were underestimating her and her personality. She does have charisma. She just needs the right environment to bring it out. She was the one who appeared on Jimmy Kimmel, I think, on the Las Vegas bill, and she wowed him and got a huge applause from the studio. So I think it would be wrong to judge drivers on conventional aspects of marketability when actually, that the charisma is there, but it's not the most important thing. And the other thing I'd say is I'm really glad that Doriane Pin got the biggest headline of any Formula E woman driver, given that. So Jason Poland on our Discord server, I don't know Jason's real surname, but he is someone who is sent by God. He produces our race timestamps so that I keep myself in line for the Discord server, and he also reproduces all the FE rumors on Discord, so I don't have to go and look them up. I just get them in my notifications. So thank you, Jason. I know you are listening because you always do. But Jason decided to produce the FIA's list of penalties from after race 1 for the Monaco weekend, and 2 penalties went to Cupra Chiaro reserve development driver Bianca Bustamante, who gave her pass to a friend to go in and out of the paddock and the pit lane. Don't do that, really. If you have a Formula E paddock pass, keep hold of it. It's a valuable thing. Yeah, it was nice to see Doriane Pin not having her thunder stolen this past weekend as the big announcement came through, and hopefully she'll do a great job on the sims, and she'll definitely get an IRL test with the Gen 4 chassis, and from then, who knows, the sky's the limit. But yeah, good luck to Doriane Pin. So we do have one more Formula E story before we move on to the fun stuff at the end, and that's Penske. So they're losing their Stellantis, their DS powertrain deal at the end of this season. Stellantis have decided to go their own way and form a completely new team with Opel. I personally think that's the right move. I haven't seen evidence that partnering with Penske is necessarily a title-winning move for a manufacturer thus far. Well, it hasn't been. And even in spite of having all of that goodwill and brand value from Techeetah, they haven't been able to take the step on and reproduce that as DS Penske over the last 3 or 4 seasons. So good move for Stellantis, I think, also to break away from DS and to try something new with Opel, given that Opel's just a much bigger brand and has many more EVs on its roster. But what do you make of the situation for Penske? They're essentially drifting. They don't have a customer powertrain deal. The only one available is Mahindra, if you believe Sam Smith of the race, who says that Lola are reluctant or unable to supply a second team. And building their own powertrain at this rate for Gen 4 just feels like a tech challenge beyond any team, starting from scratch. They're in a difficult bind, and it's a bind that Jay Penske's team has been in before, hasn't it?
You have to think back to Techeetah and the success of that team. They've really been nowhere near that ever since. I don't really think the Mahindra powertrain, which I would argue is the better option of the two, whether Lola can make one anyway, you would probably want to take the Mahindra, but I don't necessarily think that's going to put them back towards their glory days either. Yeah, it's a really difficult situation for Penske. I think relatively similar to what Alpine had to deal with when Renault withdrew their factory support of the team in Formula One. We're ostensibly losing a team that was a pseudo factory entry for Stellantis, and it may be becoming a privateer. So it's an interesting time for that team, and I would certainly hope they go towards the Mahindra powertrain if they can afford it, however much Mahindra are asking for that. But if Lola can't provide, that's probably not the worst case scenario, considering that you probably wouldn't want the Lola powertrain anyway. Is how I would read that situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that it's gonna be a challenge, I think, for Penske to put something together. But it is such a shame for the dedicated people of that team, just because, I mean, they will be in Formula E next season in some shape or form. But it really felt when they signed that DS deal that things were falling together for them. They were the original feasibility study for Porsche when they considered coming into Formula E. The thought was, well, let's partner with someone who already knows how to do it. In the end, Porsche decided to start with their own know-how instead, which seems to have worked out fine for them over the years. But there is something about Penske that seems to deter manufacturers, and it's interesting. I know Jay Penske, the man, can be a divisive character. I haven't met him, but I know that he does like to be very front and center of any operation. And I wonder if maybe part of it is teams wanting to bring in their own people, and Penske, as in Jay Penske, being resistant to that. There may be other politics as well. Maybe they just don't like the deals that are presented to them, in which case, fair enough. But yeah, very much hope that Penske can continue in Formula E, and very much hope that they continue being competitive as well. So the final thing I want to talk about, and it's a really fantastic achievement in motorsport, regardless of whether it really works out for a driver or not. It's something that, you know, it's like attempting 2 marathons in a weekend. Katherine Legge, the sometime Minardi Formula One tester, the former Formula E Season 1 driver for Andretti, the now IMSA sports car ace, decided, alongside the guaranteed entry she had for the Indy 500 last weekend, to also take part in the Coke 600 thanks to her sponsor, Elf Cosmetics. Great opportunity for her to, you know, go in the footsteps of some great people like Tony Stewart, for example, and Carl Larson, and I think a few others in history as well. As far as I'm aware, Tony Stewart is the only driver to finish both races, although he didn't do so on the lead lap, so technically not the double. But still, if we count doing both races as being the double, Katherine Legge has achieved the double, and that's something very few drivers can say. In terms of personal fitness, in terms of preparation, in terms of the psychological toll it must take on you, that's a hell of an achievement, isn't it? Even attempting 1,100 miles, and she finished the Coke 600, again, not on the lead lap, but she went out of on lap 17 of Indy, and in total she did better than Kyle Larson did on his attempts. A pretty good weekend for Katherine Legge nonetheless, would you say?
Absolutely. You know, it's one of the most grueling things you can do in motorsports nowadays, I think, is the double duty, trying to do the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 in the same day. Like, it sounds crazy to even try to attempt them in the same year because they're such different disciplines. Yeah, sure, they're both on an oval. The cars are significantly different. The way that they're driven is significantly different, and the style of racing is significantly different. The ability to switch your mental profiles between those races isn't even something I can do for sim racing. I can't imagine the level of mental preparation the likes of Katherine was putting in while she was setting up for this historic attempt. Granted, yes, she didn't get very far in the Indy 500. I will say, not her fault. Ryan Hunter-Reay span right in front of her, not hold his brakes, throttled the car up, tried to catch the spin. She just tried to avoid and not kill him and herself.
Yeah.
Was the right thing to do. And to be honest, every other driver on that grid would have done the same, would have had the same situation play out exactly the same way. Even watching it, I think I'd have done exactly the same thing. When you see a wreck happening, you drive straight towards it until the last second where you don't. Because if you're driving towards a car, you're, in theory, not going to be where it is once it's moved, if it's moving while you're driving towards it. But his car didn't fall down the banking in the way that she probably would have expected it to had he just held his brakes rather than tried to catch it in the way that he did. But, that's racing. It happens. That's the Indy 500. That's how those incidents happen. That's, to paraphrase Antonio Felix da Costa, that's exactly what happens. It's the Indy 500. It was really good to see her drive in the Coke 600 as well, though. I think Elf throwing their weight behind her has done a lot of good for the cause of not just women in motorsports, but women that broadly care about motorsports. It's not just a men's game. It's not just a thing men watch. Motorsports broadly nowadays is a multidisciplinary appreciation. Anyone can watch it and appreciate it, regardless who they are or where they are or what they identify as or anything like that. There'll always be something for you to enjoy if you like watching cars go around in circles, and that's ostensibly the crux of it. But go ahead.
Katherine Legge has always been someone who has got where she is entirely on merit, and arguably has had to work twice as hard because of the supposition that she can't be that quick. And she's always got into whatever she's done and proven that she is. I mean, for the first 3 weeks, I think, of the month of May, because it was a thrown together entry, her car was the slowest car in practice. And come qualifying, she actually pulls out a great lap, and I think was 25th out of 33, which is fantastic going. She's shown that over and over again. I still remember the Minardi test when actually she was on pace with the target, and it looked for a while like her career would take her in some shape or form to Formula One, as some kind of member of staff, whether it was lead driver or reserve driver. In the end, I think the Champ Car crash at Road America in, I'm going to say 2006, set back her career a lot. She did admit lacking confidence subsequently, and she had to basically rebuild herself physically and mentally after that, but she did it. Proper IMSA stalwart, and the kind of person that you want on your team because of the way that she can lead and because of the way that she can psychologically prepare the other drivers. I think when you listen to her in interviews, it seems like nothing phases her as well. When she was asked about, have you been doing additional work for the double, she said, well, I keep myself this fit all year round, so I don't need to. I thought that was a fantastic answer.
It's good that she got to the interview on time, I will say, because that might have been one of the funniest moments of the Indy 500, where they were going through the grid and the drivers were walking up and she just wasn't there. And the two guys either side of her were just gestured to the empty space between them when they called her name. It was so funny. And afterwards, you see her in the lineup afterwards waving and laughing like, yeah, she just clearly missed the call for that. I imagine, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say it must have been something to do with the double. But it was a pretty funny moment to see the two guys either side of her grid spot just gesture at thin air. They could have just stood there, but they didn't, so that was good.
Yeah, and in Indy weekend is always a fun weekend. There's always another race alongside it. Whatever that might be. It's usually the Monaco Grand Prix. wasn't this time, but I mean, Aidan Millward called it Motorsport Christmas. I think he's right on that. I think Indy, a bit like Wimbledon, is the kind of thing where even if you don't watch the rest of the series, you can still appreciate it. While I don't necessarily like the way that under Roger Penske, IndyCar has kind of gradually magnified. There was the controversial T-shirt before the race saying "One Nation, One Race," which either somebody came up with in error and didn't sign off, or they came up with for other reasons. But that's been widely lambasted, obviously. Then there's the issue of the Washington, D.C. street race, which came up because of Roger Penske's personal friendship with Donald Trump. I mean, so to a certain extent, all sports in the United States, I think with the exception of maybe the National Women's Soccer League, have towed the line and sort of kowtowed a bit to leadership. I think it's still possible to find many things to enjoy in IndyCar racing, and I'd definitely love to cover it a bit more with people later in the year. But Indy 500, does it remain a special race for you?
Honestly, I identify with exactly what you say there. I don't really care that much about IndyCar. There was a brief period where I watched maybe every other race of the IndyCar season, and honestly, I'm probably back there now. I watch it when it's on and other people are watching it that I can watch it with. I'll watch it. I like watching motorsports. It's not something I necessarily go out of my way to watch, other than the Indy 500. The Indy 500, it is still one of the biggest races in the world. It's up there with the likes of the Daytona 24, the Le Mans 24, the Nürburgring 24, which just recently happened as well. They're the races that you make time for. You put them in the calendar. I don't necessarily do that with every Formula 1 Grand Prix. You sort of know there's one coming next week or every other week, But the Indy 500, it's on the calendar. The Daytona 24, it's on the calendar. It's one of those races. Le Mans 24, on the calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. These blue ribboned events, they're great. They're great things to have every year. Certainly, I can remember as far back as 2020 when we didn't have these events, and all of a sudden things felt very sad. I think motorsport, like any sport, is something that fans love because they can fill their time speculating, and between the races, there's chat to have like we do on this podcast, but. I think the actual race action and the fact that the on-track action at Indy doesn't seem to have been better than it is now. That was David Land's opinion, and it was borne out in that finish, which is the closest ever. And I would love to see eventually Formula E building the kind of history and heritage which you get at Indy, or which you get at Silverstone or Monaco. In F1 or any of those things, and that's kind of why I think Monaco will stay on the calendar for the meantime in Formula E, because it's a little bit of heritage brought in from other parts of motorsport, but we'll have to see what happens there. Certainly, I feel so lucky to be able to have so much great motorsport available to me at any point. And I feel lucky to talk to you again, Georgie, so thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who joined us for this Motion Racing podcast, where we talked about the Monaco E-Prix and the Indy 500, Katherine Legge's double attempt, and also Doriane Pin getting into Citroens. Join us for the next edition where we discuss, probably more of something different, I would suggest. Feel free to subscribe on YouTube if you're not. Leave us a like and a comment if you're feeling nice, and you can do so on the audio platforms as well if you'd like to. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon.